We're recording there, and we're recording here. Definitely are doing it. Hello friends, welcome back. It is me, 2024 Marcello, aka Mr. Consistency, here to bring you another Animorphs recap and review. You'll also notice we've got a slightly different camera angle. I got a comment on the last video that was like, oh, you put the stuff away so that you could gesture wildly, and we don't even get to see it. Now in reality, I only put it away so I could do this for me, because I just don't feel right if I'm not doing this. But, you know what? If you guys want to see the hands, you can see the hands. It feels a little more well-balanced like this anyway. Let me know if you disagree. Anyway, thank you all so much for your supportive comments on the last video. They were very appreciated. Since moving out of Brooklyn, where I lived my entire life, I've been missing meeting and interacting with people who share the same interests as I do, and the comment sections of these videos have been a nice little supplement to that aspect of my social life. So, for those of you who are new here, my name is Marcello. I talk about media with a focus on 90s kids fiction, mostly, and in this series I am recapping and reviewing the Animorphs books by K.A. Applegate. As a quick refresher, when evaluating these books, I assign a grade of 1 to 10 in 4 different categories. Those are plot, or how engaging or interesting the book is in a sort of standalone sense, significance, or how much the events of this book contribute to the overall plot of the series, character, which is how much we learn about the narrator of the book and the degree to which the events of the book contribute to their greater arc, and writing. The writing category will become more relevant when we get to the books with ghostwriters. K.A. wrote each book up until book 25, and I'm interested to see if I'm able to notice a difference once we get into those who were written by the hired help, or if I'll be able to tell the individual ghostwriters apart, as the ghostwriters that they employed often wrote more than one book. In this episode, we will be discussing The Secret, which is the 9th book in the series and the 2nd book narrated by Cassie. I am excited for this one because I love this book. It was one of the ones that I had a copy of as a kid, and as an adult rereading it, I've come to think of it as a real highlight of the series. For those of you wondering if I'm going to be doing the Megamorphs books, the answer is yes, and I should have done Megamorphs #1 before the Alien, but I completely forgot to, and I didn't realize until I was writing the script for this video, so here we are. It will be okay. Back to The Secret. The cover quote is, "No place to run, no place to hide," and the inside cover quote is, "What big teeth you have." I wasn't able to find a ton of trivia for this book, at least anything that I found super interesting, other than that this is the first time that one of the Animorphs communicates directly with Visser 3 via thought speak, that being Cassie at their final confrontation, which we will talk about when we get to it. I've recapped this book before in my Case for Cassie video, but we're gonna do it again here, evaluating the book from a standalone perspective rather than through the lens of why Cassie is the most underrated Animorph. Let's do it. Alright, so my name is Cassie, no last name, you guys know the drill. This book opens up with Cassie and Rachel on yet another illicit side mission to figure out something relatively frivolous. Insert comment about lax Animorph security here. This time they're morphing rats to figure out why Cassie's lab rat cannot figure out how to get through a maze. This is for extra credit since Cassie is looking at a D, shocked Pikachu face, Editor Cello, in the class otherwise. Cassie convinces Rachel to morph rat 2 in a typical display of bad Animorph judgment when on these little side quests, and soon they are both rats scurrying along the classroom floor next to piles of their uninhabited clothing. Cassie climbs up into the maze and is quickly able to ascertain that the reason that the rat can't find its way through is because there's a ceiling fan blowing down on them, rendering pointless the peanut butter that they placed in the center of the maze to lure the rat through. Cassie and Rachel are about to demorph when a couple of boys show up and decide to kill them. Because this book was written in the 90s, we are treated with an obligatory rat running up the pants scene, which manages to scare the boys away before Cassie and Rachel demorph and head to Rachel's house to chill. That evening, the gang all meets up in the Gryffindor common room of the series, aka Cassie's barn. Cassie lets us know that the Animorphs all meet up on a twice-weekly cadence, which is new information to me. She's hopeful that this is just a routine check-in and not the onset of some new crazy mission, because Cassie is feeling stretched pretty thin at the moment. When Jake and Marco show up, they're arguing about whether Batman would beat Superman in a fight, which makes Cassie happy because it means that Jake's role as the Animorphs commander hasn't entirely stripped away his ability to be a teenage boy. Jake immediately asks Cassie if she heard about the 2 guys at school who were attacked by lab rats, but she plays dumb, probably in an exercise of futility. Jake lets the gang know that they are there at the behest of Tobias and Axe, who may have something. On cue, Tobias shows up to let them know that it looks like someone is getting ready to start logging in the forest. The group doesn't care too much about this, but Cassie does, being what the 90s would call a tree hugger. Marco is making fun of Cassie for how bothered she is when Tobias informs the group that the Yeerks are the ones behind this logging operation, and that it is likely a ploy to try to locate the Andalite bandits that have been plaguing the Yeerk expansion efforts for the last few months. Fortunately, the Animorphs are mostly not Andalites, but unfortunately, one of them is one, and this logging project threatens to wipe out Axe's habitat and refuge. As well as Tobias Tobiases, and a bunch of innocent animals, as Cassie points out. The gang wants to go check on the headquarters of this alleged logging company, but they are aware of the fact that the Yeerks will be expecting an attack, especially one involving animals, so they know that they have to be careful. They're discussing logistics when Cassie wonders aloud how the Yeerks were able to get permission to cut trees down in a national forest. The group kind of glosses over this question, for now, and they agree to do a two-pronged investigation, morphing wolves and birds of prey to go check out the headquarters from two separate angles. Rachel and Cassie are put in separate groups, confirming Cassie's suspicion that Jake knows about their rat mission from earlier. Cut to Marco and Cassie in the woods, assuming wolf morph. Cassie, the morphing queen, manipulates her morph so that her wolf head appears before the rest of the animal. It's often pointed out that Cassie is the best morpher, she is their resident intergalactic shaman after all, and I think in this book it's specifically reiterated because the book is heavy with themes of Cassie's connection to nature and the interconnectedness of all living things. I didn't appreciate this as a kid when I read these books, and I think it's a large reason of why Cassie is underrated, but as an adult I love it and I love Cassie. She just has so much more perspective than the rest of the Animorphs, and that helps her to see solutions that others can't. More on that in a much later video, probably. So, they're wolves now, and Cassie and Marco take a second to appreciate the wolves' phenomenal senses, their sense of smell in particular, before they bound through the woods toward the logging center. We're calling it a logging center because the headquarters of the logging company is a mouthful. I think I will call it a compound as well. You guys are gonna know what I'm talking about. So they arrive at the logging center and they link up with Jake, Rachel, and Tobias, who are all in the sky. The logging center is described as a 2-story tall building with a porch in the front in the style of your typical log cabin. There are huge spotlights on top of the building, and the forest has been cut back 100 feet or so all around it, giving the building plenty of visibility on anything that might approach the tower. There are a dozen huge pieces of logging equipment parked next to the building. The Animorphs remark that this is more or less typical until they see the guards armed with automatic rifles, and the wolf Animorphs smell something that they suspect may be Hork-Bajir. Cassie and Marco also notably do not hear any sounds coming from the building, indicate that it has been suspiciously well soundproofed. I should probably get the Yeerks to do my home studio. Cassie and Marco hear someone approaching, and they realize that the guards have disappeared. Suddenly, spotlights all alight on them at once, and a net falls from the sky, landing on Marco. Soon the Animorphs are being fired upon by a Dracon beam as well, which fortunately misses them. Marco urges Cassie to leave him behind, stuck under the net, because Marco is secretly extremely fucking noble, even though he acts like everything is a joke, but Cassie does not leave him. A moment later, Axe appears from the woods and slices through the net with his tail blade, and the Animorphs are able to make their escape, even as the Dracon beam fire continues. The gang regroups at the edge of the woods near Cassie's farm and demorphs. Given their narrow escape, they conclude that this is definitely a Yeerk operation. Also, they were fired upon by Dracon beams, so. The gang is now very invested in stopping the loggers, but Cassie takes a second to point out that there's more at stake than just Tobias and Axe's habitat. There are thousands of animals that call these woods home, and this logging will be disruptive to their habitats as well as the ecosystem as a whole. Marco replies to this with his typical cynicism, saying that they're fighting to save the world from Yeerks, not to save Bambi, but this is pretty short-sighted even for Marco, who does tend to be kind of callous about this type of thing. What is the point of saving the world if Animorphs are only looking out for humanity? This is kind of similar to our introduction to the Andalite ethos about other species in the Alien. The Andalites seem happy enough to use humans as pawns and appreciate the utility that they may provide the Yeerks, but don't truly seem to see them as sentient, intelligent beings worthy of all of the joys of life. It's a little bit different here, but still, the Alien came right before this book, so I think the link is worth remarking on, and I'm sure that it is somewhat intentional. Anyway, Cassie and Marco argue about environmentalism for a minute, and Cassie looks to Jake or Rachel for support, but she doesn't find any. Jake tries to placate everyone by saying, "We all want the same thing, why does it matter why we want it?" I agree with this sentiment most of the time, but in this case I don't think it applies like 100%. It gets more to the question of, what do we mean when we say that we want to save the world than anything else? And I think that that's an important thing to be aligned on when you're fighting an alien race who wants to subjugate your species and turn your planet into a chemical wasteland. I'll certainly have more to say about this as the plot progresses. So the gang deliberates over how to best stop this Yeerk operation. They contemplate just blowing it up, but security is a little too tight for that. Cassie asks again how the Yeerks got permission to log in the forest, pointing out that there are regulations in place and that perhaps the Animorphs can take a legislative route in their strategy to stop the logging. They decide that their best course of action would be to identify how the Yeerks have gotten permission to do this logging, and to use that as their point of attack. This begins with infiltrating the building, which takes them back to the security issue, but Cassie has an idea that involves morphing something very small. When Cassie arrives home later that evening, her dad asks her where she's been. This is atypical because Cassie's parents trust her enough to let her do her thing for the most part, though Cassie remarks that now they really shouldn't trust her. Granted, she is off saving the world when she lies to them, but the Animorphs having to lie to their parents is something frequently noted in these books. I think it's a really nice touch, especially as a parent now. Something very important to me is that my son and my future daughter know that they can talk to me about things. The books wouldn't work if the Animorphs were actually honest with their folks from the beginning, but I'm glad that at least they feel guilty about the lies that they have to tell, and the effects that it has on their relationships with their respective parents are illustrated. They're not brushed over. Good job, K.A. Anyway, Cassie's dad tells her that he's got a call from the animal patrol about an injured animal on the side of the highway. He's kind of cagey about what animal it is, which leads Cassie to infer that it is a skunk, the only animal that her dad is afraid of since one sprayed him in the face one time, which sounds awful. Cassie goes with her dad to help the injured animal, finding it on the side of the road, and she's able to rescue it, but not before noticing the source of its injury. A clean, semicircular burn across the skunk's back, obviously made by Dracon beam fire. The skunk is doubtless not the only casualty of their recent skirmish at the logging center, and if the Animorphs don't play their cards right, it certainly won't be the last. Cassie and her dad transport the injured skunk home. That Saturday, the gang meets at the mall. Once again, we learn that the Animorphs take care not to hang out too much in, public because it would be too suspicious, which I continue to think is silly. Teenagers hang out in groups. This is not suspicious behavior. Suspicious behavior is morphing rats on a weekday in school, or morphing an elephant and yelling at a circus trainer about the secret elephant police, or demorphing from lobster in front of some lady who's trying to make dinner and then telling her that it was all a dream. That's suspicious. Teenagers hanging out together is natural. Anyway, I'm gonna stop pointing this out one day, but that day is not today. Sorry. Once the groups all pretended to run into each other, they settle down in the food court. Axe is there as Cousin Philip, and he still has no idea how to act. Honestly, bringing Cousin Philip along is more sus in and of itself than anything, and more risky. If I were the Animorphs, I would just have Axe come along as a flea in Jake's hair or something. Come to think of it, if they are so concerned about being seen together, why are they going to the mall at all? They can all morph wolves and go and have a perfectly silent conversation in the woods or something. They can go to Cassie's barn. They can morph flies and go have a conversation in a locker somewhere. Anyway, I'm gonna move past this. So Jake tells the group that Tobias noticed that the building the logging center is based around has a termite problem. The gang is immediately trepidatious as termites are very close to ants and they do not want to morph them, but Jake tells them that the termites are not as vicious as ants, and if they morph a termite from the same colony, they probably won't face the same problem as they did in ant morph, where they were attacked by the locals while using their tunnels to escape Chapman's basement. They may face a different problem, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Everyone's still pretty reluctant, but knowing that it is the only way, they agree. Tobias apparently was able to get one of the termites from a log that the Yeerks discarded while working on the building, and Jake produces it from his pocket, and right there in the mall, the gang all acquire the termite. They go on their mission that very night, attempting to use the preceding afternoon hours to knock out some homework and house chores. Cassie obviously has trouble doing this, so she goes to visit her dad in the barn. Her dad's working with the skunk that they rescued earlier in the book, and he tells Cassie that the skunk should be fine, but that her kits likely will not. Kit is the term for a skunk baby, apparently. They are cute. Look. Cassie is clearly upset by this, though her dad tells her, "Cassie, you know nature plays rough." This is a small line, but I love that he tells her this. It indicates that, though Cassie may be depicted as the most sensitive of the group, she may have gone into the war with the most realistic view of what nature and life is really like. Her dad didn't say, "Cassie, nature plays rough," and then teach her a lesson about it. He said, "You know nature plays rough." This is likely something that Cassie's had to learn the hard way through many sad experiences in the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, and I really like that her character has gone through this. Their conversation ends with Cassie asking if she could go to stay at Rachel's tonight, secretly wishing that her dad will say no, so that she has any excuse not to go on what is sure to be a very harrowing mission. She starts thinking about the group's experience with the Antmorph a few books back, where the Animorphs were truly convinced that they were going to die underground, trapped in ant bodies. Cassie's dad finishes his work and he leaves the barn, and Cassie surreptitiously acquires the skunk. Later, at 3 in the morning, the gang meets at the edge of the forest. They morph owls, and Cassie is glad because the owl's keen night-adapted senses will be perfect for what she has in mind, which is to secretly try to locate the skunk babies. Jake refreshes them on their plan, which is to demorph 200 yards away from the compound, to crawl as close as they can until they don't feel safe anymore, and then to morph termites and dig under the force field, and then enter the building through the termite holes in the building. With that, they all assume Owlmorph and take off. A small aside, I love Owlmorph. I wish the Animorphs would use it more. I know they use it a good amount, but I wish they'd use it more anyway. I don't know for sure what animal I would want to morph if I could only pick one, but owl is certainly on the list. What cool animals they are. So the gang takes off, and they leave Tobias behind for obvious reasons. Cassie focuses on trying to find the skunk kits just to take her mind off of what she knows is coming next. They're nearing the logging compound when she hears them, trying to memorize her surroundings so that she can return later. She remarks on the conflicting feelings that she experiences. Her human mind wanting to protect the kits, riddled with guilt that the skunks are in this situation because of her and her friends, while her owl mind simply perceives them as a meal. They arrive at the logging compound and demorph, with Cassie hoping that she is able to find the skunks the next morning if she survives the night. The gang mulls over how to best approach the compound without attracting attention, and Axe suggests that one of them create a diversion. They literally draw straws, with Jake picking the short one, much to his consternation, and he walks into the woods, and after a few minutes the Animorphs hear the howl of a wolf followed by the zap of Dracon beams. With that they approach the compound and morph termites. The termite morph initially goes off without a hitch. The Animorphs note that the termite mind and instincts are conspicuously absent, almost as if they're like empty shells, a machine to be used rather than an autonomous creature. They realize that they don't know what direction the logging compound is in, but that they feel this strange pull that they are very happy to follow. They soon reach the force field and cross underneath a pine needle that casts a sort of like force field shadow of empty space that they're able to crawl through. Once they are near to the building, their conversation becomes distracted and they all sort of trail off mid-sentence as finally the termite instincts make themselves known. Cassie describes a feeling of perfect calm, an absence of fear, and a sense that they are home. In a few minutes, the gang are all happily at work in the termite colony. Termite instinct and probably some pheromones have taken over, and the Animorphs have found themselves slaves to the termite queen. In hindsight, it was probably good that they picked ants from a different colony when they had to break into Chapman's house, otherwise something similar probably would have happened. A superorganism is defined as a group of synergetically interacting organisms of the same species, and I find them absolutely fascinating. Think about the complexity of ant and termite nests, the scale and the scope of things that they are able to create, and then consider the size and lifespan of the creatures that create them. It is unbelievable. Did you know that a mass of fire ants can act like a solid or a liquid depending on the circumstances that they're in? They all somehow know at the same time what their goal is, and they act in perfect concert to achieve it. They build bridges with their bodies. I'll get back to the book now, I just think that this is important context, and also it is very cool. So Cassie and the gang are happily engaging in termite society, but Cassie has what she describes as an alien voice in her head that is horrified at what they're doing. This is Cassie's human mind, reduced to a tiny little echo by the magnitude of the termite hive mind. The voice grows stronger, and eventually Cassie's ego comes back to life, and she knows who and where she is, but it doesn't even matter. The termite body is fully beyond her control at this point. She emerges into a vast open space in the termite hive and realizes that this chamber houses the queen. She attempts to contact the other Animorphs, and she finds that they've also regained some degree of consciousness, though bodily autonomy is still out of the question. Cassie finds herself in step behind two worker termites carrying eggs. It's Cassie's job as a soldier termite to protect them from potential enemies, namely ants. She hears Rachel's thought speak, saying that the only way to free themselves is to destroy the queen. As Cassie approaches the same termite queen, she uses her force of will to convince the termite mind that the queen is not a queen at all, but is actually an enemy ant there to threaten the colony. She's able to wrench her termite body out of line, climbing over the other termites to get to the queen, where she bites its head off. It doesn't specifically say that this is what she does, but I'm pretty sure that this is what she does. We just get an image of her like advancing with her termite mandibles or whatever. So the colony erupts into chaos, and the Animorphs regain control of their termite bodies. Cassie starts screaming to demorph, unwise, because she is fully embedded in a piece of wood somewhere, but she doesn't care, demorphing and allowing her swelling body to splinter the wood of the compound building open until she is free. Cassie is in full panic mode at this point, screaming at the other Animorphs as they attempt to calm her down, which is unwise because they are right in the middle of a Yeerk compound. Rachel and Marco basically hold her down until she's calm, while Axe works on a computer in the room to get the information that they are looking for. Axe learns that there's a commission of 3 members that will vote to decide whether or not the logging can go forward. He also finds that the logging company is called Dapson Lumber, which is funny because Dapson is a dirty word in Yeerkish. I have a Gardens shirt, and I think it might be fun to also get some Dapson Lumber merch. Maybe I'll throw something together and put it on Redbubble or something, who knows. It would be a very esoteric little nod to Animorphs fandom, but imagine like walking around in public and someone recognizing it. Instant friend. Anyway, Axe learns that this commission has not yet approved of the logging, and that the decision hinges on the vote of a one man, some guy named Ferrand, that's how we're going to pronounce it, and that he is coming to look at the compound later in the week. It is very likely that the Yeerks will use this opportunity to infest him. At this point, the Animorphs decide that it's time to go. Axe does a little bit of hacking that will allow him to access the compound's computer system from Marco's home computer. Do you guys remember home computers? We used to have a home computer. He also temporarily turns off the force field and security system. The Animorphs morph wolves and are able to escape without being noticed. Which is good, because I don't think they could have withstood any more trauma that night. Rachel and Cassie sneak into Cassie's place, but Cassie cannot sleep. She keeps thinking about what she did to the termite colony. She knows that she didn't just destroy one termite, she destroyed an entire colony, thousands of little instances of life, basically an entire society. She knows that there is no escape from the law of nature, that it's kill or be killed. All of nature is constantly at war. She thinks about all of the different scales of war that are ongoing at any given moment. Great cats in Africa, termites, ants, humans killing one another, and now Yeerks enslaving and destroying humans. Then she thinks about the skunk kits. We'll touch on this more later, but let's appreciate the connections that Cassie is beginning to make here. Cassie, the nature lover, the tree hugger who's never met an animal that she didn't like, has just committed something that she perceives as a genocide-scale slaughter. She did it to save her own life and the lives of her friends so that they could all go on to protect their entire species from another genocide-scale slaughter, or at least enslavement, by the Yeerks. But now she's starting to see the parallels between the Yeerk invasion and the type of subjugation that happens in nature all the time. The Yeerks have been cast as evil for the most part in this series so far, almost as if they enslave other beings for the fun of it, for the sake of cruelty even, at times. This is the first time that we, the reader, are being directly asked to look at the Yeerk invasion as something else entirely, a product of nature, survival of the fittest, a species doing what species are biologically programmed to do. This is one of the main themes of the book, and the first instance of a question that will become more and more important as the series progresses. Are the Yeerks evil, or are their actions simply a product of nature? And if they are a product of nature, what is the ethical, right way to combat the invasion? Back to the book. That night, Cassie dreams that she is the mother looking for her babies. Eventually, she finds them, and Cassie wakes with a sense of peace. Rachel's already dressed and showered, and Cassie lets her know that she didn't have a breakdown or anything the night prior, she was just scared. I contest this, she definitely had a breakdown, and she's fully entitled to that. It is okay to not be okay. Rachel tries to comfort Cassie by saying that the termites are just bugs, and what they did wasn't that big of a deal, and then leaves. Cassie goes to the barn to retrieve some frozen grasshoppers when Tobias flies by to check on her. They chat a little bit about the termite experience, and Cassie outright says that by invading the termite world, a world in which she had no business being, and then killing them all, she's basically acted like a Yeerk. Tobias points out that the termites are not human beings, but Cassie dismisses this before telling Tobias about her side mission to find the skunk kits. To her dismay, Tobias already knows where they are, which means that he's likely already eaten one. He confirms that he has, and Cassie glares at him furiously before saying that she's gonna go save what's left of them. Tobias says that he will help her. So what is Cassie mad about here? She knows that Tobias is a predator. She knows he has to eat to survive. I think that she's just angry at nature, at predators broadly, and at herself more than anything else. She knows that the same justifications that can be used for Tobias's actions in eating the skunk could be applied to a lot of the things that she's done in her war against the Yeerks, and things that she's not very proud of. Most recently, the massacre of the Termite Society. I also love that Tobias agrees to help her without question here. The duality of his hawk and human natures is on full display here. This is a fitting introduction to what I think the second theme of this book, after the are Yeerks truly evil or is it just nature question. How can you earnestly fight for what is right and also take actions that are arguably wrong? I have some answers insofar as there can be answers to a question like that, but we will get to them when the book gets to them, so onward. So Cassie morphs Osprey and she follows Tobias to the skunk lair. Once they arrive, Tobias flies away and Cassie knows that he's going to go tell Jake what she's up to. She morphs Skunk, enters the burrow, and feeds them the grasshopper that she brought. Then she gets all cozied up with them, and before she knows it, Jake is waking her up, along with Tobias and Marco, yelling that she's nearly at the 2-hour mark, minutes away from being stuck as a skunk forever. Cassie demorphs and Jake yells at her, and this is the first book where we learn about Jake's forehead vein. There's some trivia that you won't find on Seropedia. So Jake is yelling at her, and he's being kind of a dick about it, belittling the skunks that she obviously cares so much about, to a point where Marco steps in and tells him to calm down. Jake tells Marco and Tobias to take a walk or a flight or whatever, and then he tells Cassie that he knows she had a really bad experience. He knows what's going on in her head, but he totally doesn't. Jake is a pretty smart and perceptive dude, but he doesn't have the same sort of global perspective on life that Cassie has, and I'm sure that he's never questioned, like, the legitimacy of the Yeerk invasion from a natural sort of dog-eat-dog standpoint. Anyway, he tells Cassie that he cares about her, like, a lot, and that the group needs her. Cassie asks why they need her, and Jake says that she's done more than anyone could ever ask of her, but that the Yeerks are still there, so they still have to fight. Cassie replies to this by saying that this is basically just how nature goes. The strong eat the weak, and maybe it's time that humans lose one. Jake doesn't love this take, reminding her that they're talking about people they care about, and he walks off, but not before Cassie tells him that she is going to take care of these skunks until their mother is back, whether he likes it or not. Jake reluctantly agrees, and Tobias volunteers to watch them. Cassie apologizes, Jake says something sappy, Marco makes gagging noises, end of scene. Later, the whole gang is assembled at the skunk lair, making a schedule for morphing the mother skunk. Axe is confused, asking if the skunk is sacred to humans, and then asking if we eat dogs and cats. I love Axe. The group is pretty cooperative about what they must think is a pretty silly side mission, but honestly, I get it. Even if they aren't necessarily as, tapped into the universal ethics of the situation as Cassie thinks that she is, this is a light, weird little mission that is probably a nice reprieve from the constant fights for their lives that the Animorphs have been engaged in lately. Marco takes this opportunity to make fun of Cassie, which hurts her feelings a little bit more than it should, but it does cause Cassie to reflect on the fact that this isn't an endangered species that they're talking about. It's a few skunks who might have been killed by a predator even if their mother wasn't out of the picture. She wonders why killing the termite queen has caused her to care so much about this, thinking that maybe she is as crazy as Marco has said. The Animorphs keep watch over the 4 baby skunks over the next 2 days, with Marco going so far as to name them after members of the Ramones. 3 days after the conversation in the woods, Cassie relieves Tobias of guard duty, and she morphs the skunk mother, deciding to take the kits for a walk. She's in the process of teaching them how to hunt, which ironically will require her killing more bugs, when Homer, Jake's dog, appears and Cassie sprays him. Jake, Marco, and Axe are all remarking on how terrible it smells. When Axe drops what may be his best line in the series so far, he says, "I believe the smell is causing me to become deranged. I may have to run away in panic." I'm gonna have to do a video of great Axe one-liners one of these days. Please drop yours in the comments if you have them. The group moves away from the scene of the stink, back to the den where the kits have fallen asleep. Upon demorphing, Jake tells Cassie that they were coming to tell her that Ferrand, the guy on whose vote the logging permit depends, will not be visiting this weekend after all. He will be there in an hour. So the Animorphs basically just have a single hour to make plans and to prepare for this mission. They're brainstorming a plan of attack when Tobias hears something. He goes to check it out and he quickly comes back to report that the Yeerks have already started logging. This is a little confusing to me because presumably they've already done a bit of logging, right? You know, like to build the log cabin compound and to clear the 200-yard perimeter for the Dracon beams to shoot at all the animals. Anyway, this confirms that the Yeerks are still definitely planning to infest Ferrand once he arrives, and worse still, the skunks are right in the path of the oncoming deforestation effort. My baby pushing his walker is what you hear, but we've decided we don't care about that. Thank you, guys. Cassie is surprised that Marco views this as wholly unacceptable, but I'm not, because Marco is secretly the most noble Animorph, as I've stated before in this video. I think that I've finally found the theme for whatever series I do wind up making about Marco. He's the most noble, even though he pretends not to be. The gang finally settles on a plan, that being to swoop in and kidnap Ferrand as soon as he shows up. Jake, Marco, Rachel, and Axe all go to sow some chaos and slow down the logging equipment, while Tobias and Cassie go off to see if they can see Ferrand coming in via the long dirt road that the Yeerks have presumably had to do some unauthorized logging to create. Cassie morphs Osprey and takes this opportunity to apologize to Tobias for getting mad at him for eating the skunk kits. Tobias points out that he could have just had the Animorphs bring him food, he doesn't have to kill to eat, which leads Cassie to ask him why he does choose to hunt. Tobias says that he's not just a human, he is a hawk now. Hawks hunt. Plus, eating a frozen mouse that the Animorphs could get from a supplier somewhere isn't necessarily more moral. There's still a mouse that gets killed. So they fly along, and before long they spot a jeep with a human that they assume is Ferrand in the back seat. They deduce that if Ferrand is angry when he sees that the Yeerks have already begun logging, that they will know he's still a human and hasn't been infested yet. If he's perfectly calm when he arrives, he's a Yeerk and they are screwed. Cassie wonders aloud what they'll do if he's already a controller, and when Tobias suggests that they just attack the logging facility itself rather than, kill him, Cassie states that if he were not a human controller, if he were a Hork-Bajir or whatever, they would probably just try to off him right then and there. Tobias astutely infers that she is thinking about the termite casualties when she says this, and he tells her that her job as a human is to keep herself and her species alive. This is the law of nature. Survive. Cassie says that his argument also justifies the Yeerks, and Tobias doesn't have time to respond to this before Ferrand jumps out of the jeep yelling angrily. As the still human Ferrand rages, a human walks out of the logging compound, and based off his evil aura and the fact that Tobias has seen him briefly before, they recognize that this is Visser 3 in human morph. I promise we will talk about the debate that Cassie and Tobias were just having, but let's speedrun the final battle first. Visser 3 walks out, he slaps Ferrand across the face multiple times for some reason, and as Cassie's deciding what to do, she spots the rest of the Animorphs in battle morph, with Jake approaching Ferrand in the Visser. Cassie does a quick dive to attack Visser 3, even as a bunch of heavily armed controllers exit the logging building. Cassie is soon shot in the wing and crashes into the ground where she blacks out. She wakes up in a box inside the logging compound, and she sees Ferrand on the floor outside the box, unconscious, and comes up with a quick plan, demorphing into her human form and then morphing skunk. Reasoning that the Visser will be forced to act if she threatens to kill Ferrand, she thought speaks to Visser 3, telling him that she will kill the human. They open the box, and Skunk Cassie fires off a few rounds of spray, hitting Visser 3 right in the face and completely incapacitating the coterie of guards surrounding them. The whole group flees the logging building, and Cassie follows them outside, where she is greeted by the sight of the Animorphs in battle morphs, finishing off the Yeerk forces that remained outside to fight them. As Axe speaks to the Visser, he strikes a deal. They will give him the antidote to the skunk spray if the Visser lets Ferrand go free. The Visser angrily agrees before promising that one day he will kill them all, and Axe says that he probably won't because they are sure to smell him coming. Later, all the plot lines wrap up very neatly. Ferrand is safely deposited to the hospital, where he later states that he will be suing Daps and Lumber, and the mother skunk, fully healed, is reunited with her babies. While this reunion happens, Jake and Cassie discuss the emotional roller coaster that she's obviously been on through this book. Cassie wonders if she, as a part of nature, should be living by the simple laws of nature, to kill or be killed, or if she, as a human, has some sort of moral responsibility to be better than that. Jake thinks that she is both. She's the person who did the termite genocide, but also the person who saved the skunks. All animals take care of themselves, but only one animal, on Earth at least, has the intelligence and power to save all the other species, in this case from the Yeerks. At this, Tobias drops out of the sky to tell them that Visser 3 has been bathing in grape juice at Axe's suggestion and is now a lovely shade of purple. The end. Alright, so let's talk about the moralizing. What is this book trying to say? Where are we left here? Who is right? What is ethical? All these questions and more on this episode of Marcello Talks About Animorphs Sometimes. Okay, so this book is obviously pretty critical to Cassie's development. The Great Termite Slaughter is sort of an entry point to how ruthless Cassie becomes as the series progresses. The saving of the skunks is both a way for Cassie to atone for this sin, and also to try to do some good to make up for all of the other collateral damage that the Animorphs create in their battles. That's forest animals, dead host bodies, you name it. There's plenty of carnage to go around. The thing is, acting destructively in one case doesn't mean that you no longer have the right to act with compassion in others. I think that this is what Jake was getting at in the last chapter. We have the capacity to do both. They don't cancel each other out, but we can still do both. And the thing is, a quest for moral purity is almost always an exercise in futility. It is always an exercise in futility. Here's one of my favorite examples of this. People love to make a big deal about whatever issue they care most about. It doesn't matter, for the sake of this argument, what the issue is. We can just say, like, large-scale humanitarian and environmental issues. Pick one. And it gets very easy to be judgmental of others when they don't care about the given thing as much as you do. How can you not care about this thing, this atrocity, this one is really bad, and you're a bad person if you don't care about it? But at the same time, we all use smartphones, and smartphones are all reliant on cobalt mining in the Congo, something that is its own humanitarian crisis. So am I arguing that if you use a smartphone, you have no right to care about other environmental and humanitarian issues? Not at all. I am arguing that you do, but that you should also understand that no one is morally pure, including probably you, and maybe try to be a little bit less judgmental of others when they don't share the same specific passions as you do. We live in a maximalist world where we are bombarded by all the news at once all the time. You can hardly blame people for tuning some of it out for the sake of self-preservation. The point that I'm trying to make is, as pertains to the themes of The Secret, the destruction and the compassion exist in parallel. They don't cancel each other out. Just because the Animorphs are destructive, it doesn't mean that they should give up all attempts to proactively do good things, even if they're small. You have to just do your best every day, all the time. In terms of the idea that the Yeerk domination of the galaxy is comparable to the human domination of Earth, I think that we can use the ideas I was just talking about to create a sort of framework to attempt to make sense of the question. What the Yeerks are doing, from the perspective of their victims, is obviously wrong. From a natural perspective, though, I think that it's a lot closer to a species doing what it can to survive than it is an evil conquest for the sake of evil itself. The Yeerks are biologically programmed to enslave others. That's why they're able to infest host species. Now, granted, they could have a symbiotic relationship like the Iskort later on, but we'll talk about that when we get to that book. There are some obvious differences as well. The Yeerks don't kill their victims. They take over their bodies, which is arguably worse. Imagine being trapped as a prisoner in your own mind for the rest of your life. But at the same time, we know that the Yeerks' lives without hosts are also pretty sad, and we also know that they're capable of love, which I think is huge. At the end of the day, if Cassie, the leader of the Great Termite Massacre, can channel her guilt and compassion into nurturing life elsewhere, who is to say that the Yeerks can't do the same? Cassie is basically Visser 3 to this one termite colony. I get that they're just bugs, but the Yeerks kind of think that humans are bugs. Anyway, I'm not a Yeerk apologist or anything, don't get me wrong. I just think that this book does a lot to highlight the fact that the battle for humanity on a broader scale, the galactic battle against the Yeerks, is not as cut and dry as like the Andalites would have us believe, or as the first 8 books of this series would mostly have us believe. There is no such thing as moral purity, and maybe approaching the enemy with compassion rather than as a unilateral evil to be eradicated from existence will yield better results. We'll have to wait like 40 books to see this really manifest, but this is the seed of Cassie's ultimate purpose being planted. So that's the secret, and I'd like to ask a question that I haven't for the last few books because it was kind of obvious. What do we think that the title of this book alludes to? What is the secret? Surface level analysis tells me that it's the secret Andalite habitat in the woods that the Yeerks are searching for, or perhaps if we go a single level deeper, the fact that the Animorphs are actually mostly human children and not Andalite bandits. It could also be referential to the shame that Cassie feels over her actions in the termite colony, and the fact that she has to keep her feelings that this invalidates her status as a moral and environmental person a secret from the rest of the group. Basically, like the termite massacre is Cassie's secret shame, or the fact that it's her secret shame is a secret, or maybe the secret is how to get rid of skunk smell. I honestly do not know. This title has always perplexed me. I'm probably reading too far into it. There's 50 books, each of which is the something, so presumably some of them are bound to be kind of phoned in. But we are only on book 9, so please tell me what you guys think. I do not know. Okay, so let's do some rating. I'm giving this book a 9 for plot. I think it's extremely well done. The side plot and the main plot play off each other really well, and both do a lot to add to the overall theme of the book. The only thing that prevents me from giving it a 10 is that it's not quite as like riveting and plotty as The Invasion, the only book to receive a 10 in the plot category for me so far. What's good, guys? Editor Cello here. I just wanted to clarify and say that what I mean when I say that the A plot and the B plot like played off each other very nicely is that there's something kind of poetic about the fact that the skunk morph that Cassie has that helps her escape at the end of the book. And if she hadn't escaped, Visser 3 would have found out that the Andalite bandits were humans, and it would have probably put a pretty quick end to the entire series, and the Yeerks would have enslaved all of humanity. She wouldn't have had that morph that she needed to escape if the Animorphs hadn't created the collateral damage that they created in the beginning of the book when they were scoping out the lumber facility. Now, that's not to say that it's a good thing that the skunk got, you know, burned because of the Animorphs' actions, but it is to say that, like, I think this book is trying to say that things are a little bit more complicated and maybe a little bit more like entwined than like simply in an isolated way being good things or bad things. They are just all things that happen, that make up this like greater miasma of life. And I did not say that while I was actually making this video, so I'm saying it now. Thank you, guys. Look, I got a new microphone. For significance, I am also giving this a 9. I think a lot of big ideas that are crucial to the rest of the series have their starting point here. The idea that the Yeerks are just following their biological instincts and should not be reviled is a precursor to approaching them with compassion and understanding, which is necessary for the ultimate resolution of, you know, the whole series. For character, I'm also giving it a 9. Cassie's development in this series, in my mind, is the best of all the characters. I know a lot of people don't like her, I know people think that she's boring or a hypocrite, but I think that she's complex and extremely interesting. Cassie's whole character arc basically asks the question of what happens when idealism meets realism, and it's an interesting question outside of the plot of Animorphs, and it's executed really well through Cassie's narration. Also, K.A. told me personally that Cassie was a little bit of a self-insert, and I like her more because of that. For writing, K.A. wrote it. It does the trick. 8. I was considering throwing it a 9 because I love the way that the A plot and the B plot play off each other, but I already accounted for that in the plot section, so we're sticking with 8. And that leaves the book with a final score of 8.8, which puts it at number 2 in the rankings right after The Invasion. Somewhat unexpected, but then again, I do love this book, so I guess it makes sense. I'm kind of questioning why this is rated so much higher than The Encounter, which I gave a final score of 8.15, but I think the actual like standalone plot of The Encounter is a little bit less interesting than this one, and the question of whether or not the Yeerks are a monolith of evil is a little bit more significant to the series than whether or not Tobias is a hawk or a boy. Anyway, they're not that far apart. To refresh, the top 5 books so far, as per my extremely scientific and perfect ranking system, are The Invasion at number 1, The Secret at number 2, The Predator at number 3, The Encounter at number 4, The Capture at number 5. Looking at the order of that top 5, I think I am doing a good job here and that this makes sense. And that's it. Thank you guys, as always, for watching, and if you made it this far, you are a true YouTube hero. See you soon.